Nice to meet you. This is a human being with a beating heart, just like yours. Someone who cares about you very much. Just a reminder that we are how we treat each other. Today you chose animosity, and that doesn't mean you have to make the same choice tomorrow. If you spend more time healing than hating, you will find much magnificence.
Discrimination has been horrific in my life. It really devastates me that I experience the most hatred from my own people. But in the other, it's given me a unique opportunity that most people don't have. When you're outside of the world, exiled from it, you get to look on it from a distance. And what I notice as an outsider is how much I love humans. Why would I deny the world my beauty? And why would I deny myself my beauty? How could I come and speak on a podcast about healing and an unhealed version of myself? We have to live the things that we believe.
I'm Radhi Devlukia, and on my podcast, A Really Good Cry, we embrace the real, the messy, and the beautiful, providing a space for raw, unfiltered conversations that celebrate vulnerability and allow you to tune in to learn, connect, and find comfort together. Well, I'm so excited to have you here. And thank you so much for being here, because whenever I've thought about people I want on the podcast, it's been people that I have either spent a lot of time with, or with you, I haven't spent that much time, but the time that we have spent has just brought up so much in my mind in terms of what I've learned, but also given me such a different perspective that I've carried with me. And I really wanted to share that, hopefully, with whoever ends up listening to this podcast. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for
and
having
for
me.
what you've done for me in my life, whether you know it or not. One thing that I wanted to ask you, every time I've been around you or seen you, your elegant confidence has kind of had me in awe, because a lot of people haven't lived the life that you've lived, but you still show up as yourself every single day. And so I wanted to start off by asking you, because I struggle with this, how have you gained this confidence in your life?
Well, I wanted to say thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you for bringing color to the conversation. I feel like the alternative was worse. Repressing myself took such a toll on my health holistically when I felt like I was just a shadow of a person, not a real person. And so I think the way I became courageous is I really accounted for how painful it was to live a lie, how empty I felt, how hollow all of my interactions were. And I knew that I never wanted to go back to that, where I felt like a hologram, not a human being.
Yeah.
And so even though it felt intimidating to be myself, it still was less painful than the alternative.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is that so many people are on autopilot of that ghost self, that they just think that that misery is the only way to be.
Or the easier option. Like, I find that when you are in a place in your life, and if you've done something for such a long time, even if it's the thing that's negative for you, because that feels like comfort, the alternate of becoming better or becoming a better version of yourself or your authentic self ends up feeling like a scarier option. And so you can live your whole entire life trapped in this version of yourself that isn't even you. But did you have any specific things that you did that helped with your confidence? Like, were you someone who was quite shy growing up? So going from that to then becoming who you are now, what were the tools and techniques and methods that you used to bring yourself to this version of you?
I was so shy that I started to walk when I went to hide in a cabinet at a family dinner party. I needed to get away from people, so I got up and I walked and I hid.
Yeah.
So it's funny, because I think a lot of people have known me my entire life, have seen so many eras. And I think people always want to have this narrative that you've always been something. But I think my life is a really great example of you can totally transform. A practice for me that has always helped me is writing, because I started writing when I was maybe 11 or 12. And at the time, I didn't think what I was doing was poetry. I was just writing my feelings down. I felt like, especially growing up in an Indian household, no one was really asking me how I was feeling emotionally. It was only physically. And so I didn't have a place to really work through my emotions. And so I just started to write. I would kind of write down what I was feeling, and then I would share it online under a pseudonym. And then
what was the pseudonym?
Larry, which is very awkward.
Larry, love that. Love a Larry.
And then people all across the world would say like, oh, what you're writing resonates with me, or I feel the same way, or I have the same insecurities or same doubts. And so it kind of felt like there was an underworld kind of alongside this one where people were honest and vulnerable and real. And that was only available to me through art. Wow. And that art was the place that we could go to actually be a freer and more honest version of ourselves. And I think that's true today. That's why we flock to movie theaters, because what we see represented feels so real and palpable to us.
Yeah.
And so writing for me has always allowed me to take inventory of how I'm actually feeling. Because I think when people ask you, how are you, you go into that autopilot answer. But writing actually allows me to say, this is what's actually surfacing inside of me. So the more that I began to write, the more I began to write myself into existence. Yeah. I began to say, oh, I actually didn't really like how I was treated at one time, or I don't like the person I'm becoming. Who do I want to become? And I could experiment, and there's less stakes when you're writing it down on a page. So I kind of planned out who I wanted to become.
That's amazing.
And I think what I was doing in Texas, where I grew up, was I like to think of it, you know, in one story, it's like a story of discrimination and bullying and dissociation. But in another story, it was a story of dreaming. I just had a lot of dreams. Wow. And I would write them down. And then now I'm lucky enough to be able to live them.
They always say that creatives and artists, you won't find an artist, and I guess you won't really find a person, but more so an artist that hasn't been through pain, because so much beauty comes from it. But I love what you said about writing, because I found that solace in writing too. But one thing that sometimes stops me is because everything is now for show, where when you're writing online, it's for show. When you're taking pictures, it's for show. We live in such a world of show that sometimes I was finding myself, if I hadn't put pen to paper for a while, I was filtering myself from myself. And I used to get so scared in those moments that I don't even want to know who I am, because I'm too scared of putting pen to paper and seeing it for myself. I really have to, you know, every time I take a time away from doing it, I notice when I come back to it, because most of my other life is on show, I fear what's going to come out on paper. So sometimes what I've ended up doing is like writing and just throwing it away, or writing and just burning it, just so that I know that I'm releasing it with no fear of even someone seeing it. But sometimes you're trying to hide it from yourself, because you don't even want to see it yourself. You said that you grew up in Texas. I would just want to know a little bit about how that was coming into yourself, where in a place that it can be quite difficult to express your authenticity.
It was hard because on the one hand, I had support from my community for the racism we were experiencing. So I had people around me saying, okay, what they're saying about us is so silly, we're amazing. And like celebrating our culture, celebrating our difference. But then when it came to gender and sexuality, I had to suffer in isolation. Because if I told anyone that I was being bullied, then that would confirm that I was in fact gay. And so I didn't want to tell anyone what was happening. I remember even once my mom got wind of the fact that I was getting harassed in school, and she in a car was like, hey, is this happening to you? And I felt so embarrassed. I didn't want her to know that I was being bullied, because you know how Indian families are. I knew that she would get really upset, and then I didn't want to hurt her feelings. So I wanted to protect her from the fact that her child was being persecuted. And I feel a lot of grief about that now, because I know my parents, and I know that if I had said, hey, this is happening to me, they would have done something about it. But I think I from a young age, I internalized this idea that I had to rescue me, that I would have no support from anyone else around me. So I had to become as smart as possible. I had to work as hard as possible. I had to be exceptionally articulate and talented so that I could get out of there. And I think the rewiring of that as an adult is so hard. And so I think that's what frustrates me, is that our childhoods don't just stay in our childhood, they cast a shadow for the rest of our lives. So many of the trauma coping strategies I developed now, my brain is like, but these are the things that helped you survive. And then my adult self is like, but you don't need to just survive anymore. You can thrive. You can move beyond that. Maybe you can be mediocre at some things. Maybe you can be really bad at some things, and that's okay. I'm amazing
at so many things, but it's okay to be okay at some things.
Totally.
You said your family, you almost underestimated how supportive they could be. I do find in our culture, we're kind of I did the same thing. I underestimated how open I could be with my parents from a young age. And I think that's quite normal in our culture, because I find that with a lot of my friends who grew up in, other type of religions, other type of cultures, they'll be so open. They'll say the randomest things to their parents, and they think they can do that from a young age. They believe they can. I feel like it's the closed mindset that we see growing up. It's not even what our parents tell us. It's what we see them do with other people that makes us think that they are part of that community or have the same mindset. When I was like thinking about boys in my family, when I wanted to date someone, I wouldn't tell them about it. When I was struggling, whether it was academically or at school, everything just felt like, you're right, you feel like you have to deal with it yourself, because you don't want to be the failure or the person that is changing what the expectations are of you. Were your family, you said they were supportive, and you regret that, and you have, how did you word it? You said remorse. You have remorse. Yeah. How were they when you started sharing it, coming from the culture that we're from? How was that for them and for you?
I think the problem with being a byproduct of diaspora is that often the only representation we have of our brown parents is through white media.
Yeah.
And so there was a filter with which I was constantly comparing their love to the love of the people around me. And because it looked different, I felt like it was absent. So because my parents weren't as physically affectionate, or didn't say that they loved me, I believed that they didn't love me, because that's what my white peers were receiving. And now as an adult, I'm like, actually, my parents showed up in such a profound and durable and just like when I was sick, the kind of devotion and care that I experienced was really unparalleled. And I think a kind of care that I don't even have the language for. And I feel like I could spend the rest of my life trying to learn that kind of ancestral wisdom that gets activated when someone's sick.
I completely agree with you. I feel the same way about my parents. I was talking to someone else recently, and they said, I realized my dad had never said the words "I love you" to me. And I thought about it in that moment, and I had never realized it until that point. I was like, my dad has just about started saying "love you" when I moved away, and that for him was at the end of conversation. I love you, I love you. But then I thought about, did I ever feel the lack of love growing up? No, he was present. He was attentive. He understood, having two girls in the family, coming from a dad who is raised in the generation he was. All he wanted was to understand our emotions, to be there for us, to show up as the provider, which is how he knew to love. That was what he was taught. To love is to provide for my family, to make sure I'm there, to show up. And also somewhat he was there for us emotionally because he was such a soft person. He always has been. And I really appreciated that nature that he carried with him. And I feel when I feel my parents love most is when I've learned so much from how they are as humans, which means that they've done a lot of work on themselves to even give that to us. I think about the generic love that we now see, and it's actually so much more shallow because it's masked in words and
it's performative.
Performative, exactly, like external expressions versus the acts of service. I think our parents' generation were, their way of showing love is acts of service. Like you said, when we're unwell, they will show up with every single herbal remedy that they know from their grandparents. They will give up everything to make us food and create that environment for us. Whereas I don't think we have that in us anymore to even give or experience that with other people.
I think I'm really trying to learn.
Yeah.
I feel like it's frustrating to me often that our only definition of culture is also very superficial. It's kind of surface. And for me, culture is actually like a deeper wisdom. It's a way of observing the world and observing each other. And especially with the passing of my Achama, my grandmother, a few months ago, one of the ways that I'm processing that grief is really like, how do I care in the way that she cared for me?
How do I carry it on?
Yeah, carry on that legacy. Because when we talk about through migration losing our culture, I think part of what we're losing also is that sense of care. And I don't want to say selflessness, but that sense of devotion is the reason I'm alive. Is that I've had so many caregivers in my life who invested so much in me. I mean, I can't even imagine what it was like for my parents when I came home and I said, don't speak our local languages to me. I don't like that. I don't want to go to the temple. I want to be just like my peers. I'm embarrassed. I remember I got into a fight with my nanny once where I said, don't wear a sari in public when you're going to school, because then people will look at us. The kind of care it takes to look at your child that's become a weapon against everything you are, and to still say that you love that child and to feed them. I mean, that's taught me so much about compassion, because I think my parents knew this isn't you, this is your trauma, this is your fear, this is your anxiety, this is your insecurity. And the way that you were going to school you out of that is by loving you harder and showing you that the things that you're running away from are actually the things that you need to be running toward. And so it's very strange, I think, becoming an adult, because I revisit so many foundational scenes that I was very angry at my parents about. And I'm like, actually, they were in the right.
I know.
And they saw something I couldn't see at the time.
I think about that all the time. I was just doing a voiceover for one of my videos, and it was something I was reflecting on when I was back in London. My mum, from a really young age, has made me green juice in the morning. Like, she would make carrot juice. She would make fresh juices in the morning. She would full-time work, but she still had time in the morning to make me fresh juices, take out my vitamins, still do her meditation and prayer, and then work full-time, come home from work, make me a full fresh meal, help me with my homework. The amount of things that she did for me. And I was saying that I used to take that juice and pour it into the bush outside, and I would take the vitamins and I would put them into the bush outside before I would leave. I'd take it with me.
That bush must have been so healthy.
That bush was vibrant, okay? She was thriving. But now I go back and my mum's still making these juices for me, and now I'm buying myself green juice and making it, and I'm taking my vitamins for myself. And again, I feel remorseful in the same way, where I'm like, wow, she was pouring so much into me for my health foundations. Like, she was building my health for me from such a young age, and I just did not appreciate it. That remorse is actually, I feel, a good part of our life, because without remorse, you don't have that desire to get deeper into those things, right? Like, I know now in my adulthood, I cherish the time that I spend with them. My grandma, I cherish the time that I spend with her. And it's partly because I've moved away, but also you do feel the sense of time more when you grow up. Because you feel it in yourself. When you're young, you feel like, death's never going to hit you. But as soon as you get to a certain age, I mean, for some people it's way later on. But for me, especially after, learning a bit more about spirituality and the soul and what it means, I do feel death every single day. Like, I think about it every day with my family, but that makes my relationship with them so much better and so much deeper. And I know you mentioned your grandma, and I actually had picked out something that you had written about her, and it brought tears to my eyes. It probably will when I say it again, but I would just like to share it with people, if you don't mind. I myself, by the way, I've lost 3 grandparents, and I've got 1 grandparent left who I'm probably the closest to than I am of any of them that had lived. She's 90 now, and you had written a post where you said, "She loves me in a language I can't even speak, all of me. Rainbow hair, rainbow life, with such rigor and devotion. We'd sit around in the living room, do nothing together, and that's what I'm going to miss most, the nothing that felt like everything." Okay, yeah, well, there you go. But that was so beautiful, and I completely agree, because I think about that with my grandma. I'm an ugly crier, by the way, just take it all in. But I think about that every single time I think about my grandma, and I'm like, wow, those moments that you feel their love, it's like, it can be, and that's what's so beautiful and pure about that generation, that they can do a whole lot of nothing, and you can just be in their presence and you feel their love, like the hugs that you get from that generation, and because of how, in my eyes, how much more purer they were in mine. Very simple. Like, their mindset was so simple. What their desires were very simplistic compared to what we all have now. And I think that simplicity comes through in simplicity of heart. And you really feel that whenever people would meet my grandma, they feel this energy about her that you don't feel much anymore. And I think that really that is so precious to have in your life, and it's so beautiful that you even got to have that relationship with your grandparents, and I feel
so lucky
to
have been accepted by eventually all 3 of my living grandparents who are alive and are no longer. it doesn't matter if the world doesn't accept me, because I had that kind of foundational acceptance. My Achima, who just passed, would take me to the markets all in Thrissur in Kerala, where we're from, and would say, oh, you should try on these earrings. You should try on these bangles. Haha, you're more feminine than your sister. You look amazing. And would come to my shows in Kerala and say that she heard the voice of God in me, even when I was on stage wearing a dress. And it was never about, I accept you, here are the pronouns I'm using. It was something so much deeper than that, like a profound recognition of me as a human, and a respect. And I feel so lucky and so grateful, and that gratitude, I think, actually fuels me to do this work of learning how to care like they cared. Because I feel like, with our generation and social media, we've become so, we see human beings as content.
Yes.
And we reduce the vast unknowability, the universe of one another, into a series of easily identifiable, decipherable metrics. And we don't have slow time together. And what I loved about ending every year in Kerala, which was always my ritual, is it was a decompression slow time.
Yeah.
It would just be days on end of just eating and lounging.
The best.
And always feeling like I was having fun, not feeling like I had to be at a zillion things or have a fully packed schedule, just kind of zooming into it. And so now what I'm really trying to do is to bring that appreciation for slowness, for deliberate time, for actual encounter and witness, rather than just kind of superficial embrace.
And I think, social media makes you feel like you know people and that you see people and interact with them more than you do.
Right.
So you almost, and I even think about that with my close friends, where I think I'm updated in their life and I'm connected to them because I'm seeing, my mind is seeing them. So my mind's forgetting that I've only experienced them through this vessel versus having this human interaction with them. And when you were saying that thing about carrying the care that she had on, I think that is such a beautiful legacy to carry with you. I've seen that in my mum recently, and I've not seen it in my mum recently. I've noticed it in my mum recently. She's had it her whole life, but she has this incredible desire to serve the elderly in our community, to the point where a lot of my grandma's friends will call her before they call their own children to help. And but not even in, and by the way, no one's watching. And that's what I love about to actually see care, where she is making, those people, oh yeah, I'll call that person for you. No, my mum is calling up every single person to find a carer for someone that she hardly knows. She's going out of her way to, someone's broken their leg in the community, she's making food for them every single day. She's calling the elderly that have lost their spouses, and she's calling them every day to check in on them because she knows that that's the only phone call that they're going to get. And every time I see her going, in my eyes, out of her way, which is what it seems like in my eyes, so much effort put in for people that you don't even know, mum. And I'm like, wow, that's just the capacity that she has to love and care, which is so lost. Because for me, I'm learning that now and wanting to carry it on because I see it in her. But that's been something I'm having to learn. Whereas for her, it's so natural because she grew up in a community in Uganda where people did that for each other, in Glasgow where people did that for each other, even when she was a refugee. And I think that in this day and age, we have, whether it is physical or emotional gates up. We don't necessarily go to our neighbors physically to even ask for things. We don't know who they are. And we've lost this ability to actually create what deep community means, whether it is acts of service or emotionally being there for people. And I really think that there are few people left like that. So to carry that on, and I have to learn how to carry that on, it makes such a difference, because these people are so touched by what she does for them.
I believe that love is an infinite resource.
Yeah.
And I believe that love is not something we do, it's something that we are. And that often doesn't make sense to people who are viewing it from a sort of modern secular equation. They're like, what do you mean? There's a limited amount of time, there's a limited amount of resources. But I want us to actually have a deeper conversation, which is like, when we are compassionate to others, that is also an extension of compassion to the self. I think true compassion actually abolishes separation of the self and the other, because it's about creating a network of care, so that when I'm helping you, I know that when I'm suffering, I've built that kind of relationship, and it's reciprocal. And it also, I have no space in me for toxicity. And when I fill my heart with compassion, that ultimately creates a better reservoir of peace and serenity inside of me. And so what I also learned from my grandparents is that care is not just about the other person. It's also about the cultivation of a good life in yourself, of gratitude and charm. My Achima giggled until the end of her life. She had so much delight and amusement. She loved her mocktails and cocktails. She had so many little trinkets that would inspire so much joy and wonder in her. There was almost like a childlike awe. And then I felt annoyed because I was like, why do we have to call that childlike? Why do we have to see maturity as a departure from that wonder? What if actually the preservation of wonder is the most mature thing we could do?
I mean, first of all, just the way that you speak just mesmerizes me. You are just so eloquent, and the things that you say is almost, you know what it is? You understand your heart so well, your words are able to express it. And I think sometimes when I think about the disconnect where I hear what someone says, and I'm like, I feel that, but I wouldn't have been able to say it in that way. And I do see that as, like you said, it's not poetry. It's actually just that strong connection that you have built, the clarity that you have built between your own voice and what comes out of your mouth. So I just wanted to say that first of all. I think it's incredible, the work that you've done to get there. But also what you said about, you've been saying all the things that you got from your grandparents, and when you said your parents were just unlimitedly compassionate even when you weren't. That's one thing I absolutely love about you, because every single time you post things that people have said, which by the way, you get so much of, and it upsets me to my core when I see that. And then I see a response. And there was one that you said that I wrote down, and you really live by the practice of, I'm going to give and pour out so much compassion. But to have that, you have to nurture it in yourself. You can only give what you have within you. And you must have had to do so much to get to that point. But there was one, I think the comment that someone had written to you, maybe it was like some puke faces or something. And you wrote back saying, "Hi friend, nice to meet you. This is a human being with a beating heart just like yours. Someone who cares about you very much. Just a reminder that we are how we treat each other. Today you chose animosity, and that doesn't mean you have to make the same choice tomorrow. I believe in your capacity for transformation. If you spend more time healing than hating, you'll find much magnificence in the places where malice once festered. The world will feel so much more lush and wondrous, I promise." If I received that and I had just sent you some sick faces, I would be rethinking my whole entire being, but from the most beautiful place, because it's true. You may be angry today, but that's not the same choice you have to make tomorrow. But you have chosen to take whatever hate has come your way and pour love back into the world. And that takes a lot. So how have you built this compassionate nature? Because it's okay. It's one thing saying it, but I see you doing it. So there's one thing in theoretical, but then to put it into practice, where do you take the anger that you get and how do you turn it back into what you give out?
In one story, discrimination has been horrific in my life, and of course. But in the other, it's given me a unique opportunity that most people don't have. When you're outside of the world, exiled from it, you get to look on it from a distance. And what I notice as an outsider is how much I love humans, how much I miss intimacy, how much I want to be a part of that. And the same way in which I think people are coasting on autopilot, I think people take advantage of so many things that I can't. And so therefore, there's a preciousness to being able to walk outside that I have reverence for.
Yes.
Because that's not a given for me. There's a preciousness for being able to be here another day, because that's not a given for me. And so what that's meant is that I treasure things so much. And I remember that we're all going to die, to your point. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, not devastating, because that means that all of that hatred is a distraction from that fundamental truth. The truth is, every single person is going to die. That's the only given thing that we know. And knowing that, are you going to waste your time hating me when you could actually spend your time cultivating a garden, throwing green juice at a bush.
Yeah.
There's so many more interesting things to spend your time doing. So what that actually shows is you don't believe that your life is sacred and precious, and you believe that your own time is worth wasting. That inspires mercy in me because I believe that your life is precious. I believe that you should cultivate goodness in you because you're going to die.
Yeah.
So once you remember the stakes of that, which is that we are all human beings and we're all trying to run away from that fact. I mean, think about it. When we look at the brain, the decision-making part of our brain is actually quite small in comparison to the emotional part. And yet the language we have for the emotional part of the brain is primitive or reptilian, when in fact that's the most human part. What's so strange about humans is we're continually embarrassed that we're humans.
Yeah.
And I actually love that I'm human, which means I love that I'm fallible. I love that I'm changing. I love that I'm becoming. I love that I don't know. I love that I'm ignorant. And so when I learn to love myself as a human, now I have so much love unlocked for other humans. So it might seem counterintuitive to people of how could you love people who hate you? But it's not counterintuitive when you remember that the only way you're able to hate other people is when you hate yourself.
That's so true. And I, whenever I think about the online hate that happens, and even when I reflect on it to myself in my own way that I live my life, whenever I see someone, if I'm in a place where I don't feel confident about myself, let's say, and I see someone who unapologetically is living and being who they are, it irks something in me. Like, it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And it's not because they're living their life, it's because of what it is reflecting in me. And so what do you feel is like, there is so much hate for people. There are so many people who cannot handle others expressing themselves fully, even though it has nothing to do with them. Where do you think that roots from for people where they are so uncomfortable with someone else's pure expression of themselves?
It has to do with their abbreviated joy. The truth is we're born free and we are having the time of our lives. And then we get shamed and we're told that you have to be a certain way in order to be worthy of love. And unfortunately, that often happens in the most intimate arena. Our parents, our best friends, our lovers, who tell us that we have to minimize ourselves, hide ourselves, betray ourselves in order to belong. And that happens when you're a kid, so it rewires your entire brain into thinking that if you actually express your true version of yourself, you'll be punished for it. And that's why I have compassion, because I was lucky. I grew up in a family that allowed me to grow and change and become. That's the most profound privilege I'll ever have in my life. The foundational security of knowing as a young person that my parents would have my back if I changed my mind about who I was. That's amazing.
It really is.
And so when I see a lot of people who are resentful or angry or bitter in response to my appearance, I know that there's a grief surfacing there. And the truth is that often anger is a secondary emotion. That's an easier touchstone for people than feeling pain.
So true.
And there are very few spaces, especially in Western culture, for lamentation. There's just spaces for desensitization. No one is actually allowed to take off work when someone in their life dies. There's no place or ritual that you go when you have a heartbreak. You're just expected to bounce back, bounce back, bounce back. And I don't think that that works. That's not how humans work. We have to be able to feel. So what happens when we don't feel is that gets built up as resentment. And so what's happening right now, I think, especially around LGBTQ rights in this country, is a lot of people have unprocessed grief, and I become a mirror for them. And it's so much easier to demonize me than it is to sit with their own grief and heartbreak.
Definitely. There's this quote that I think of where it says, you always feel like an angel when you're sitting next to the devil, when you're standing next to the devil. And it's not that that person is the devil, but when you are able to demonize everybody around you, when you're able to pick faults in every single person that you see, you'll always feel good about yourself. Because if your mind is constantly seeing their flaws, I will always feel great about myself. And I think that's what a lot of us do, or a lot of people do when they are not quite ready to internalize and see their own. It's easier being busy looking at everybody else's. It's easier looking at everybody else's, what they perceive as being their negatives, or finding those little things. Because that work that has to be done for yourself is far more difficult than, or it seems more difficult than it is to pick at someone else.
I appreciated earlier how you acknowledge the amount of work it takes to be able to get to compassion. Because I also feel like one of the negative side effects of social media is that people can like share memes and quotes, but that's not the same as doing the practice.
Yes.
And one of the things I've always respected about you is your commitment to practice and ritual.
Thank you.
Practice is the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And for me, a contemplative practice, that could be meditation, it could be writing, it could be singing. A contemplative practice actually allows me to recognize when I'm running on autopilot, even though I didn't know I was. I have to separate myself from the thing to be able to observe it from afar.
Yeah.
And the more that I've invested into my practice, the more that I've realized often the most incredible, awe-inspiring, earth-shattering work is the most quiet and visible and delicate. And so the problem once again with social media is that it glorifies visibility as the metric of progress, when in fact spiritual transformation will often just bubble and froth, not explode.
Yeah, and I find with my time that I spend in my meditation, the reason it allows me to be more compassionate with other people, or not even have the time to think about their flaws, is because it brings to surface so much of my own that, and that's what I love about the practice, is it doesn't mean that I dislike myself for it, but what it does is it helps me come to terms with who I am and see the things that I have to work on. And if I'm busy working on those things, one, it makes me think, well, if I have all of this going on in me, how can I even judge anybody else? I have all these things I'm working on. Their weeds may look a little bit different and I may not recognize them because I may not see them in myself, but weeds are weeds. We all have weeds in some form, in some sense. They may look beautiful, they may seem like they're flowers, but every single person has them. And so what that reflective practice, as you put it, does for me is it puts a mirror for myself. And so it stops me from even judging people. And I notice, because, you know, practices as they do, mine ebbs and flows. There's so many times where I am so distracted during my practice, but I'll still try and show up. There's so many times where my practice for months and months is just half-assed and I'm just not giving it my all. But I see that. Then I become more judgmental. Then I'm picking at other people more. Then I'm busying myself in other people's gossip, and that becomes attractive to me. And I think as soon as the negatives about people, that's been a red flag for myself. As soon as conversations where there is gossip or negativity, or I'm seeing a little bit of spice put into things and I'm enjoying it, as soon as that becomes attractive to me, that's a sign for me that things are not working the way they're supposed to for myself. And so that's always about it, because it's so easy. Gossip is spoken about more than goodness is. Talking about other people with people is spoken about more than these type of conversations are. And so a natural tendency can be to have those, that be the nectar and the juice that we live off. But I've noticed that as the red flag in myself for when that practice is not, I'm obviously not doing my practice the way that I'm supposed to.
That's incredible that you have that level of self-awareness. I think that's something I'm trying to cultivate in me. It's hard because I think for so much of my life, and it's a balancing act, right? I would have to point fingers at a society that neglected me and say, it's unfair. I mean, in the midst of this conversation, there are over 700 pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation in this country. And in the UK, where we both have connections, there's just an accelerated increase in anti-trans discrimination. And I think it's important to condemn things that are happening societally. But the more that I focused on my healing journey, I've had to really take personal responsibility and accept I might not be responsible for my trauma, but I am responsible for my own healing. And so what it means to actually take personal responsibility is so hard for me, when for so long I've felt like I was unable to express my anger and my rage at the system that failed me. But now I think, especially in my 30s, I'm having to really take account. If I'm going to sleep stressed out, I have to take responsibility.
Yes.
I have to take responsibility for when I'm not sleeping. I have to take responsibility for when I'm just scrolling online, which can often feel like a form of digital self-mutilation.
Yeah.
I have to take responsibility to unplug and say, how am I treating myself with respect? It is one thing to say that this society is disrespectful to me. It's a deeper thing to be disrespectful to ourselves. And so now I'm trying really hard to show up with goodness and dignity to myself, which is a compassion practice that is often harder for me than compassion for the other. Because on the one hand, yes, the care that we grew up with was amazing and it was gendered. And that's why I was nervous about that word self-sacrifice earlier.
Yes.
Because I've seen a lot of Indian women in my life who spent so much time uplifting men and never demanded any of that reciprocity, right? And completely neglected their own dreams, aspirations, wonder and wisdom to caretake for others. So the care that I want is awe-inspiring, but it also demands reciprocity. Otherwise, it's not true compassion. And so I feel like also when people hear compassion, they still think it's selfless. That's not compassion.
No.
And that's the work I'm really trying to do now, is to extend the same due diligence that I have to my perpetrators of harassment, to myself, to understand that I can often be a perpetrator of harassment to myself when I look in the mirror and I say, your life would be so much easier if you just modified this one thing about you. Really?
Well, I always think about how there's so much that I love learning so much from what you share about what's happening in the world. And, I think about every single time there's a woman that is attacked on the street, or, that how unsafe the world is becoming for women, or always has been, but, that's always highlighted. And then I see the things that you share about, and I'm like, there's one thing for women to feel unsafe on the street, but then there's a whole other part which people don't even think about. And I really, for you, when you're walking out onto the street, like you said, you don't even know whether you're going to get attacked. You don't know whether someone's going to say things to you. There is always, and this isn't me over exaggerating, there is a fear every single time you walk out of your house for death or for damage, and emotionally or physically. And I just want to say I appreciate so much that you still, despite what you have to endure when you walk out of your house, you still do that. Because there are people who won't walk out their house when they've got a spot on their face. No, really, they won't, because they're worried about what people are going to say. Well, I'm sure you get looked at differently. You get people look, and again, it may be in a maze because you have an incredible dresser and the way that you carry yourself is phenomenal. But a lot of the time it's because you are something unfamiliar. For many people, they would just hide. It's so easy to become a recluse and someone who doesn't even want to step out into the world when it's so much hate is out there. How have you taken away that fear of death and fear of being hurt, which you have been in the past, and still managed to continue to do that? Because I think that's beautiful for anybody to learn for themselves.
Why would I deny the world my beauty?
Yes, why would you?
Yeah. And why would I deny myself my beauty? Because when I am here in this form is how I'm able to speak the truth. How could I come and speak on a podcast about healing in an unhealed version of myself?
Yeah.
We have to live the things that we believe. I don't believe that heaven is something that will happen when I die. I think heaven is something I can create right now. Heaven is my contemplative practice. I want every day to feel like paradise. I'm not going to wait for that.
No.
So then when that's my criteria, I have no choice but to gift the world my fullness. And I know that I was brought here to be a light. I have a firm sense that that is my purpose on earth. From my youngest memories, I knew that I wanted to share my art with the world. I used to dance to the latest Bollywood tracks at every single Indian dinner party, wearing my mom's chunnis, dancing around. I wanted to be a performer. I wanted to dazzle and share. That's who I am.
Yeah.
It's like telling the sky not to be blue. It's like telling the wind to stay still. You can't invisibilize what I'm here to do. And it's not actually about overcoming fear. I still have a fear of all those things. That's what it means to be human, is to be fearful. But what I now have is ritual and practice around fear. So fear knocks. I say, hey, fear, let me accessorize you. I dress up fear. I put it in a really cute heel. I walk outside with fear as my best friend. It's there. I greet it. I think the reason fear often becomes the author of our lives is because we're constantly banishing it. But when we actually include it, that's what I really believe in everything I'm trying to do in the work, is radical inclusion. Radical inclusion means looking at every emotion and saying thank you. So both my pride and my shame, thanks for being here. My hatred and my love, great. You all have something to say here. And once we begin to incorporate even all the things that we judge in other people, because those are often indications of things we are unresolved in ourselves, once I began to radically include all parts of myself, then fear no longer has a stranglehold on me, because fear is one voice of many voices. So when I'm going outside, fear says, you're going to get attacked. But now magnificence, another voice that's louder because I've nurtured and exercised it, says, or someone's going to say, great shoes. And then I just choose to believe that narrative. I think where I'm trying to get better now is on setbacks. So there are days where, like you said, the practice disintegrates. You go to your most base and crude version of yourself. And I feel like I'm in that right now. And that I felt a little trepidation. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on camera. Am I ready? I've been feeling a lot of grief this week, a lot of sorrow this week. I think a lot of it's physical exhaustion. I'm in the middle of a tour where I'm getting like 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. So it just accumulates. But I think it's also just like a deeper kind of a sense of frustration of, why do I have to work so hard? Why do I have to be so hardworking in order to get the bare minimum? And it feels unfair. And so what I'm now having to really do is recognize, instead of saying, okay, these things are not part of my highest self, because that's what I often do, is I shame myself for having those feelings. I have to sit in those feelings and say, they are looking for a witness too. And that often care is just witness. So even the things that are thoughts that feel most embarrassing or silly or superficial or petty, we can't just dismiss them because they don't go away. You have to actually witness the pettiness. Don't act out of that place, but witness it, hold it, feel that grief. And that's so hard for me, because sometimes I fear that if I feel the fullest extent of my grief, I won't be able to bounce back. But then I'm like, every time I do, it shortens.
Yes, I completely agree. I think in the same way, and I have had to train myself to try and do that, and I think, again, I keep saying part of our culture, but it's part of human culture, but also a lot of our culture. I think about with my parents of, they would hide when they were crying. They wouldn't show when they were feeling upset. And so you get trained from a very young age to say, these are the emotions that are okay to show, and these are the emotions that are not. And it doesn't go away, because every single thing that you feel, every single thing that gets put through your senses leaves impressions in your heart and in your mind. Like, there's the word samskara, it means impression. And I love that word so much, because it also translates to footprints. And that's exactly what happens. Every single emotion, every single experience we have creates footprints, some deeper than others. What I then end up doing is trying to fill that imprint out with something else, with another emotion that masks it, or, you put a plaster over it. But really what we need to do is see all emotions as being part and parcel of our growth. And so when I feel anger, I notice and a lot of the emotions are what you say, they're secondary, where we're feeling something, the anger is coming out as the response because I'm used to expressing it in that way. But where is it coming from? What is the experience or the trauma that I have gone through that has created this response? Emotions are actually responses from your body telling you something is happening and I need you to listen. And I always think, whether it's a physical thing where your body's feeling something, where you get spots because you're stressed out, or your hair starts to fall out because you've got, that comes with stress also, or whether it's these emotions that are pouring out of your heart telling you, I need you to listen to me. And I've struggled with that so much also, because I'm such a crier, and I used to hide that so much. If I was angry, I would cry. If I'm sad, I'll cry. If I'm feeling happy, I will cry. But why is one emotion better than another?
Totally.
And so I've learned to see it as what you said. It's a growth. It's sitting with it, and what you said, accepting it, processing it. But then also the concept of emotions being something that have to pass through you, not sit in you. And once I learned about that, I was like, this is wonderful. Like, you may not feel like it's wonderful at the time, but I'm like, wow, that anger was really necessary in that moment. I needed to feel it, but I also need to let it go for those other emotions to flow through me too. I mean, the way that you have managed to do that for what your life has brought you, and what you said about, there was one part that you spoke about the culture part of, I still see that, the women suppressing themselves and elevating men. I went to a wedding recently, and I still see that so prominent in our tradition. And I try to, as I've gone through my spiritual practices, I've really learned to differentiate between religion, spirituality, and culture. And I think we touched on this once when we were sitting and talking after something, where religion or scripture, and if you actually take it back, there is so much acceptance within religion and scripture. But then what happens is there's a lot of male dominance through somehow that has happened within religious institutions, that somehow the culture at the time is poured into and masked as spirituality and religion. And so those demands and those laws of whatever they're trying to put out, it ends up being where women are seen to, they say it's religion, but it's just a masking of culture. And I'm sure I think you've done so many studies based on this, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that and what the things that surprised you or that you've learned through that.
It really devastates me that I experience the most hatred from my own people. It's most often Indian men and Indian women who call me an embarrassment, who say that I've been contaminated by Western values, who say that I'm holding us back. And it's embarrassing because when we actually learn our history as South Asian people, we have thousands of years of not just recognition, but reverence of gender nonconforming people. And gender fluidity was actually seen as a spiritual path. The idea of breaking up with the human obsession with gender norms to being able to be a bridge to a divine source and to be able to speak truth. That gender nonconformity allowed us to be truth sayers, to tell stories and pass on traditions. But so much of that was lost with colonization. When the British invaded and colonized South Asia, they criminalized gender nonconformity. They created laws like the Eunuch Ordinances laws, which actually made it illegal to cross-dress in public. And they sought the complete elimination of gender nonconforming and gender variant communities. And it's sad that I only learned that in college. And it's sad that I grew up in a very tight-knit Indian community feeling like if I was trans, that was a betrayal of my culture, not a continuation of it. And it's sad that in South Asia, trans people are so visible, and yet in our South Asian diaspora, we're so minimized. Because I think a lot of times the way that our diaspora has worked is don't draw attention to yourself, hide, be very quiet, and then you'll be safe. And I can have compassion for that. And I can also have compassion enough to say that doesn't work. It's never been about, and I should know this, I was the one telling my nani not to wear her sari. It's never been about what we look like. It's never been about what we smell like. It's not been about our body hair. None of that shape-shifting won't win. What wins is actually finding truth and power in it, and power in your truth and truth in your power. And I think that's the lesson that we as South Asian trans people can really show South Asian American and British South Asian people. Like, actually loving yourself unapologetically is the way forward. You can't love yourself 20% and then 80% no. You have to have radical inclusion of all the parts of you that you've been shamed in.
And I think, you know, when people actually think about the depth of what spirituality means, what it truly means to connect to God or to yourself, we all have feminine and masculine energy within us. God is both feminine and masculine. And it's funny because within our Hindu culture, the feminine aspect isn't spoken about as much at all. Jay actually did so much research and speaks about the feminine nature for us as Radha, but has spoken about that so much and has shown how the power of tuning into to worship, but to also connect to the feminine side of God is so important for us and for us to connect to that within us. And I think what's happened is, I think people don't realize that we both have those within us. Like it's not even spoken about much, where you don't realize that every single person, it has a soul. That soul is both feminine and masculine. And we pull on them throughout the day, throughout our life. And to actually be in balance, to actually be in tune with yourself is to connect to both. If we are connecting to one more than the other, that is us out of balance. And it's so interesting to see how things can shift through generations and generations, and how things can be carried on through traditions when it makes no sense. And we don't question it because also people maybe aren't doing the studying or aren't going back to the root. And so it's word of mouth that gets passed on versus truth and reality.
I think the reason we don't question it is that would incriminate the people who said that they loved us. It's often our parents, it's our teachers who say, you have to act more masculine, you have to act more feminine. And once again, it is easier to demonize a small group of trans people than it is to account for the entire inventory of pain of growing up in a world that before asking, how are you, said, are you a boy or a girl? You know? And we've been so saturated with the idea that performing our gender is our imperative for being on earth.
Yeah.
And what I really want to tell people is that you can take all of the time that you're allocating into confirming other people's gender norms and reallocate that into throwing green juice at a bush. That would be more interesting use of your time than trying to emulate these 19th century definitions of gender. And so that's why the reframe that I've often given the world is that I'm being targeted not because I'm a victim or because I lack or because I'm broken or faulty. I'm being targeted because I am powerful and I'm harmonious and I represent possibility, and people sabotage possibility because they don't think that they're worth it. They don't think that they're worth expansion. And what I really want the world to understand is the reason I champion this issue so hard is because I want healing for everyone. It's not self-indulgent. It's not selfish. It's not just my concern for myself or other trans people. I want genuine healing for all people. And right now our gendered system is not. It's toxic. It's disgusting. It's despicable. It's all the slurs that they say about trans people. They're misdirected. They should go towards our patriarchal system. And in order for there to be healing, there has to be a radical embrace and union of our divine masculine and our divine feminine.
And I think, like you said, the easier option for you would be to walk out in what people would expect you to dress in. What people don't realize is you are going out of your way to actually, no, you're not going out of your way because it is who you are, but you are making a point to stand in your own self and to show up in this way because it is going to benefit everybody long term. And you could take the easy option. You could live your life and hide it, and that would be an easier option for you. You don't want to walk out and get shouted at and get things thrown at you, whatever it is that you've experienced, but you choose not to do that. So it's actually, I know you've been able to change the narrative and see it as you showing up as yourself, but it is also a sacrifice that you are making to show up when people are not ready to yet accept it. I think people's view of it is, oh, you're just doing what you want and but no, you are doing so much to even be that and to show up because of how the world is not ready yet to deal with what's going on in their own hearts.
That's my spirituality.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a long time to develop this language and awareness, but what it means to be a spiritual person is to not wait for the world to reflect the value systems that you believe it should have, but to live those value systems now. And I want to live in a world where we congratulate people for giving birth to themselves, where we allow people to become the fullest and ripest versions of themselves. I can't just speak about it. I have to live it. I have to embody it. I have to show people that it's possible. And that's not about me wanting to be a martyr. There are days where I can't, and I step back and I say, it wouldn't be safe for me in this airport to be wearing this heel, so I'm just going to put it in my bag.
Yeah.
There are days in which I have to make concessions, but ultimately I always return.
Yes.
I always return to this, because I know that when I'm writing, when I'm speaking on stage, when I'm speaking to you on this podcast now, if I didn't come as this version of myself, the words I'm saying wouldn't be there. They're there for me because this is me getting ready for ritual. And my job on this earth is to speak the truth. Truth is my ritual. So how do I speak the ritual? I have to dress as if this was God work, because I think it is.
It makes me so sad when I think about, obviously having grown up Hindu, and I don't necessarily, connect with I wouldn't go out and say I'm Hindu anymore. That's not a religion that I necessarily feel as connected to. I definitely feel more connected to my spiritual path and my own connection. And the reason I say that is because I feel, one, in Hinduism, it's become a little bit confusing, where we know what we stand for, but let's say it is about the spirit and the soul and love, but only love certain people. And I think a lot of religious institutes, and that's what's sad about it, where religion can actually be a really beautiful, uniting thing, but it has become so segregating, and it has become something where it's masters, we love, and we're open arms, come to our church, come to our temple, come to our synagogue, but there's rules to the love, and there is no rules to love. And that's what really upsets me, because I've only done a small amount of study and through my own practice, but the essence of every single religion actually is unlimited love and unlimited acceptance, not fear, not with specific rules and regulations. It is accept everyone. Everybody is worth loving. But we've just put so many restrictions on that based on our filters that we have as society, that it's made religion so unattractive to so many people because of those things that's happened. And that's why I think people are moving away from going to religious institutions. They are creating their own paths, but now we have to create those spiritual communities ourselves, because they are no longer safe places for people to go to. And what you said about our community being the most hateful, it's really sad to me that, and slowly I'm seeing in the temple that I sometimes go to in London, that's where I started my practices, I'm seeing there is more acceptance. There are more, which is sad to say, more women that are in more authoritative figures. There is more open-mindedness. But the fact that it's even got to the point where there was closed doors for people, that to me is just, it's wild. It's wild to me that it's been even translated into that. And I'm sorry and I'm sad that you have even had to go through that yourself, but that you've maintained, what's incredible is that you've maintained your connection. And I've had friends who are Muslim and have been told that they are literally going against their religion by being gay, and that they are literally going to go to hell. And then what you said, they had their family dynamic. They had their family who were supportive and loving and kind. And so no matter what happened with other people, no matter what they said, they still maintained their relationship with God, with themselves, and with their family. And I think that foundation of community is so important, whatever struggles you go through. And to have that foundation of family is just really precious and invaluable almost. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I have a few, 3 questions that popped up in my mind. What is something a lot of people don't know about you that you'd want them to know?
I'm remarkably silly. I think I haven't found a way to communicate that online. So I have a lot of serious talking head videos. But in person, I'm way more ridiculous.
Well, I feel like I've experienced that with you. So I appreciate that part of you and sharing it. What emotion do you find difficult to deal with the most, and why?
I think with our conversation, it's grief. It's like the newest old friend. Every time I'm like, again, I thought I did this work, and I run away from it, and I keep myself busy so I don't have to sit in the pain. But it's something I'm working on.
And when was the last time you had a really good cry? And if you don't mind sharing, why?
It's been a while, so it's hard to recollect. You're inspiring me to find cause to do one tonight. I should just plan it into my schedule. If you want me to make you cry, I'll try.
What's your usual release of emotion? How do you normally release if you are feeling sad? Is it through writing mainly?
Writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I keep a daily journal. That's part of my contemplative practice. And I write down every single thing that I think, feel, and do every single day.
I need to start doing that.
And it's so emotional for me. I mean, my astrological sign is Cancer. I'm a very much water sign. And so just like being able to look at it, my day, and be like, I'm alive. I just like...
I love the gratitude that you have for life. I think it's something that people, like you said, we can go on autopilot day by day by day and not have that deep gratitude. And I think one thing that I'm taking away the most from this is, if you have the sense of death in your mind every single day and not see it as morbid, but see it as this fuel that gets you to feel this gratitude every single day, I think that if there's one thing you're going to take a lot from this, but if there's one thing you're going to take that to actually feel that gratitude and genuine connection to the day that you are gifted every single day.
I mean, it is kind of morbid and beautiful.
It is.
Every decision you make in life, what if you ask yourself, is this rooted in the fundamental truth that I'm going to die? Then we start to make very different decisions.
It's so true.
But we just operate off of immortality as the premise. And that is killing us, actually, prematuring our deaths. What I've actually found in my life is that like I'm able to clear out the bullshit. I have conviction that time on earth is finite and precious and sacred. So I have to be very intentional with what I do with it.
Yeah, so you don't need to be sending those rude DMs to people, guys, okay? We don't need to be sending that hate message. You've got better things to be doing. The last thing that I like doing on this is silly, so I think you'll appreciate it. It's what kind of crier are you? So I have categorized the types of criers. There might be more. But there's the loud, ugly cry, which is the, I don't know. You know what that looks like. The breathless, which is like... the sniffler and snotty, where there is liquid coming out every part of the body when they're crying. The high pitched, that friend who suddenly goes like this and doesn't know how to come back down. That I'm not crying, you're crying cry, the one who's like really elegant and I've got something in my eye. And then the silent cry, the one where you don't even know his cry, they just kind of go to the bathroom, come back, and nothing has happened.
I'm the elegant cry.
Okay.
Yeah, I really have a lot of jealousy, and I'm working through that emotion of the loud crier. Like I want to heave. I want like a dramatic cry, you know? But mine is very subtle.
Oh, I kind of saw that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have to give us a little example of it later. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. This has honestly been, I don't know whether I'm going to say this, but like my favorite conversation. But yeah, thank you so much for showing up as you and for doing everything that you are doing. I have so much more to learn in this space and so much more I feel I want to give. And I think this has really sparked that in me, and so much that you have shared has... yeah, so much reflection to be doing for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't miss out on my new episode. It's right here. And if you're listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, please go and leave a review with your biggest takeaways. I love reading your comments. And if you have any suggestions for guests or topics, you can leave them in the comment section too. And just remember, you don't need a reason to have a really good cry.